Just when we thought employment law was slowing down, Minister Brooke Van Velden came out of nowhere with an announcement about the Employment Leave Act. What am I talking about? The Holidays Act is looking like it's going to get scrapped. And this coalition government is hellbent on introducing the Employment Leave Act before the next election. If you want to know all the ins and outs of the announcement and what we know so far, then guess what? This episode is just for you. Welcome back to Lawlands. My name is Sanam, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Employment Law Done Right podcast. Yes, you heard right in that intro. We are looking at the Holidays Act getting scrapped. Woo! I know I've probably done this kind of episode a few times so far on the podcast, and it is because there has been announcement after announcement, year after year, about the Holidays Act getting a refresh, getting revamped, and now it's being discussed that the Holidays Act is going to be scrapped. Yes, believe it or not, they are looking at repealing it and replacing it with the Employment Leave Act. How are you feeling about that? What are your thoughts? Did you see anything on LinkedIn? But of course, we don't have too much information in terms of all the ins and outs, but we have enough for me to give you a full breakdown today about what is going on. Now, before we do, I just wanted to do a quick Laughs with Lawlands because it's been a while. So if you're new here, then Laughs with Lawlands is where I give you a dry joke in these episodes. 2 slices of bread got married. The wedding was amazing until someone decided to toast the bride and groom. I saw this in our local bakery, funnily enough, and it was so good. Such a good joke for a bakery, and I thought I have to share this on Laughs with Lawlands. So I'm so sorry for another dry joke, but also not. And the great thing is that the Holidays Act might actually become toast as well. We are kind of glad that the Holidays Act will become toast because the Holidays Act has just been one of the most complex, problematic employment laws for employers for a long time. It's hard to apply it. It gets confusing. So last week, Minister Brooke Van Velden, who is the Workplace Relations and Safety Minister, announced that the government is taking a new approach. Now, a lot of you might remember that there was a task force that was put together in 2018. That was really great and really cool, and there was a lot of discussions around revamping the legislation. It even got to a stage where I believe that there was 22 recommendations or something that was put forward. People weighed in, there was consultations done. You know, you've got Retail NZ, EMA, everybody weighing in, all these different organizations and associations weighing in. And after they did that, Minister Van Velden came out and said, actually, no, this is probably not what we want. I believe that it's back to the drawing board. So we went back, and it seems like they are coming out with the Employment Leave Act. Now, look, we are far, far away. I'd like to preface it with that. We are far away from the Employment Leave Act coming into place, but that doesn't mean that things are not going to potentially move quickly. And what they're talking about in terms of the coalition government is looking at a bill ready to go by early next year, and they want to see if they can actually move this forward and get this across the line before the next election, which is aiming for maybe December 2026 is when they're thinking. So it might move really quickly. So I am looking forward to these changes. Now, mixed signals though from people, and we'll get into that. But before we do, I just wanted to say, make sure you hit follow so you don't miss a beat on these major employment law changes. As you can see, we've got our finger on the pulse here at Lawlands. And if you want the full breakdown of timelines, FAQs, and even a step-by-step action plan that I've thought of and put together, then grab your copy of the free Lawlands guide around the Employment Leave Act and what you need to know. What I've done is I've pulled everything from the government announcement and put it all together in something a little bit more easier to read and understand. And there's also some examples in there as well. Please feel free to check that out. Let's get back into it. So why does this matter? I mean, the reality is that you can raise wage claims outside of the 90-day period. That goes on until 6 years after the incorrect payment. I see it so often. The fact that employees might have been paid incorrectly or their leaves might not have been calculated correctly, all of that can bubble up and fester. So let's get into exactly what is changing. And the first thing is annual leave. So we all know right now, the law is a bit weird and wacky. So if you don't actually know this, the law is weird and wacky because I'm sure many of you, nod along if you agree, you've entered into employment. And within the first 12 months of you being employed, you might have accrued leave, meaning that you've gotten little bits of your leave week by week, little by little. And let's say after a couple of months of being employed, you decide, I actually want to take an annual leave day. And the employer lets you do that. Actually, the way that the legislation is set out is that employees receive 4 weeks annual leave after 12 months of continuously working for their employer. So the entitlement is actually in weeks and it comes up after the 12-month marker. That's when you get that full amount of 4 weeks. What employers do allow though is like what you've experienced and I've experienced in almost every job that I've been in New Zealand is during that first 12 months, you can take your leave as it comes. The reason why I mention this is because the way that annual leave will be accrued now is going to change. No more 12 months. It will be very clear in the legislation that annual leave kicks off and accrues from day one, meaning you don't get 4 weeks on day one. I would love that. But you don't get that. You get little by little. And what the accrual rate will be for somebody that is working 40 hours per week, which will be a lot of you out there in the corporate world, you will be accruing at 0.0769 hours per contracted hour worked. So that is how you're going to accrue little by little by little to get to that 4 weeks per year that you are owed. Now, accrual continues in this new piece of legislation during paid leave, parental leave, volunteer leave, and jury service. It stops during unpaid leave and ACC if you're not working. That is a critical component of the legislation. Raise your hand if you've ever had an employee that has taken substantial amounts of unpaid leave. I see it a lot in the education sector, and it's a lot of times where the employee might be off on longer periods of time. We're looking at medical incapacity and ACC situations as well, and people are shocked when I tell them that no, the employer actually accrues leave during that time. The next thing that is interesting is employees under this new act, if it goes through, can cash up 25% of their total leave balance annually. 25% is a lot of your leave balance. At the moment, it is 1 week once you become entitled to it. And you can only do that when you become entitled and once during that entitlement period. So let's say that you're talking a year from now, and we're looking at roughly the 29th of September next year, then you could cash up your 1 week. But with this new piece of legislation, it will be 25%. And a lot of times people love cashing up because they like to go on trips. I noticed in the hospitality sector, lots of employees would be sending money overseas or they'd be going to visit family and they wanted a bit of a lump sum paid out to them. And now the biggest thing of all, are we ready? Leave will be taken in hours. Yay! Not weeks. So, how many of us feel that the 4 weeks leave is the bane of our existence when we are running payroll? I know there are payroll professionals listening to this, and the weeks thing is a problem. Hours is great because you can actually see hour for hour how much the employee is accruing, and a lot of payroll providers and systems out there do it on an hourly basis rather than in weeks, but that is technically not in accordance with the Act. So great news that that is the approach. Now, we'll shift over and move on to another form of leave, which is sick leave. The great thing about sick leave is that we are changing things up. And I believe that this is going to be quite beneficial because at the moment, currently, as it stands, you've got 10 days sick leave after 6 months of working, regardless of the hours worked, with a further 10-day entitlement every 12 months. And it can only be taken in full days. If you look, you can reach an agreement with the employee, between the employer and the employee, for taking part days, and you can approach it that way, but the Act doesn't actually allow that. So what's going to happen now is that instead of the 6-month continuous employment and the sick leave kicking in, it's going to be a day one right, and it's going to actually accrue from day one. So it's proportionate to the hours that the employee is actually working, rather than just getting 10 days straight out after 6 months. I know how I feel about this. You might not agree with me, but I believe that we are seeing sick leave numbers going up and up and up since COVID. And some of them, yes, absolutely genuine. But I have seen a lot of people taking the mickey out of sick leave, and they are pushing and pushing, and they've exhausted their sick leave, exhausted their annual leave, they are unpaid leave, and I have seen more and more employees doing this. And I honestly can tell you hand on heart that it is not what you think. It is not they are going through anything outside of work or anything like that. It is them honestly just taking the business for a ride. So there are employees that are doing that, and I believe that this will really help. So the accrual rate will be 0.0385 hours per contracted hour worked, which means that it will accrue little by little, and there will still be the maximum accrual cap, which is 160 hours, which again is equivalent to 20 days. So you'll still have that cap that's in place, and part-time workers will receive a proportional entitlement, meaning that they will receive what is proportional to them in terms of part-time work. Sick leave, that can be taken in part days, not just full days, which is great. And that means that will be fixed in the legislation. When it comes to bereavement leave now, we'll pivot to that, and family violence leave. Again, similar to sick leave, it's available after 6 months of continuous employment or continuous service with the employer, and is only available in full days. The great thing about the new proposed changes is that it will be available from day one, and the entitlements remain days-based but can be taken in part days, offering a lot of flexibility. So instead of increasing the days, you're being able to spread out the hours, which is fantastic. The next thing that's changing is public holidays and otherwise working day test. I am so excited for this. I don't know how much this was the bane of my existence when I worked in advisory. I remember one year I decided it would be a great idea to take the after hours phone, which meant that I was there on call during the Christmas and New Year break. I had never been to Queenstown, and I had just moved to New Zealand a little while before, and I thought, I could just do it all, right? We could do Queenstown and also do the after hours phone. It was the year, unfortunately, that all the public holidays started falling on a weekend, which meant that things were Mondayized and Tuesdayized. Oh my goodness, did I get calls left, right, and center. And they were all about determining otherwise working day. And we know how difficult it is because the current legislation has a multi-factor test, which is really horrible. It talks about checking the employment agreement, seeing the number of days, but then you're not necessarily sure. But why not make it clear? So this is why it's great that the coalition government has come out with this. And what they have said here is that there is a new 50% test that will be applied for employees without fixed patterns. That means that if an employee has worked for 50% or more of the relevant days in the previous weeks, it's considered an otherwise working day. And right now in the Act, alternative holidays are provided as full days. Now that will change, and that will be hour for every hour worked on a public holiday. This was another thing that would shock employers. They would call up and then they would ask, how does it actually work with the alternative day? Does the employee only get 4 hours because they worked 4 hours on the public holiday, or do they get a full day? The way that the Act is set up is that it is based on a full day's worth of work. But the new changes will mean that it is dependent on how many hours were actually worked on the public holiday. So these hours can be taken on any day that could have been worked and can be cashed up any time, not just 12 months later. So that is great, and that is an awesome benefit that allows flexibility for both parties. The next thing that's really interesting is a shake-up to casual work. We all know that there is a PAYG or pay-as-you-go loading that's put on casual employees, and that is because it accounts for the fact that they don't get annual leave like a permanent employee would. They usually get that 8% to account for the fact that they might want to take holidays and do extra bits and bobs. The first thing is that there is going to be a new 12.5% leave compensation payment that will apply. So casual workers will get 12.5% on every hour worked, which replaces annual and sick leave. So you know that there are a lot of casuals out there that are getting sick leave because they work that, I believe it's 40 hours in a month or 10 hours per week, something like that. But usually they would get 8% for their annual leave, but when it came to sick leave, they would still be entitled to it if they met that criteria. So now it will be 12.5%. Every hour worked, it replaces sick leave and annual leave. But the other aspect of it is for fixed term employees specifically. Now, we know that people that are on a shorter fixed term, they also use that 8% loading or that PAYG for annual leave. And sick leave might not apply if they're under 6 months employed. For fixed-term employees, that is changing. Annual leave and sick leave will accrue from day one on contracted hours, and this aligns with permanent employees. So we're bringing everybody up to speed, bringing them to the same exact level. When it comes to permanent or fixed-term employees working additional hours. So currently, as per the law, additional hours for permanent workers require actually complicated calculations. It requires you to go down, look at their previous work history, all of that. The additional hours is going to change. Salaried workers with hours covered by a salary won't receive additional payment. But if you are permanent or fixed term and you work additional hours that are not covered by your salary, automatically you get 12.5% on top of what you're earning. And that is how they will be able to show additional work or understanding extra hours and leave. And the last thing I wanted to chat about was payment calculations. Currently, it's complicated. We've got multiple complex calculations for different types of leave. I remember when I had training on parental leave and how to calculate, it went over my head. I had no idea what that was, what anybody was calculating or what it means, and I am no payroll guru, so I still don't know to this day. But variable pay, such as commissions and overtime, are factored into some of the calculations, and it can get really confusing. So now what's going to happen when it comes to payment calculations is that one single hourly leave pay rate is going to be used for all types of leave, based on base wage for the day of leave, plus piece rates averaged hourly, if that's applicable. When it comes to fixed allowances, they are going to be paid in full during leave. And when it comes to commissions, bonuses, and other incentive payments, they are excluded from leave pay. So we're separating so that it's very clear cut on what the employee is actually going to be getting. And the whole idea behind this is to create more predictable costs for the employer, and it might slightly reduce leave payments for employees with variable pay. If we look at this as a whole, this is one of the biggest overhauls that we're going to see. I think 2003 is when the legislation was introduced. 2010 is when we had quite a big shakeup to the Holidays Act, but it was not good enough. It made things just as complicated, and now it is time to reform and remove this ambiguity and make the compliance actually achievable for employers, because it is about the fact that it gives more clarity to employees. And one of the ways that it actually does, which I found really fascinating, was changing the way that the payslip details need to be provided to employees. I have that all in the guide that I'm going to be linking down below in the show notes, so make sure that you check it out and you give it a download. And the last thing is that, look, we can prepare, and I've put an action plan together, like I said in that guide, but the devil is in the detail. We need to find out what the ins and outs are of the legislation. We need to see if this hours-based model is actually going to work, and we need all the industries to weigh in and lay it out. Hopefully, so when the businesses weigh in, they feel like this is the right compliance framework and will give a lot of clarity and confidence. But let's see what happens. We've got a long way to go. Like I said, next year, early next year is when we're going to see that draft bill being released. But when it comes to the actual passing of the bill, they are aiming, the coalition government is aiming for before the election next year. But let's see how that goes. And before I close off for today, if this episode has got your compliance brain kind of ticking, then follow the podcast for more straight from the hip updates as the reforms roll out. And don't forget to download that free Law Lens guide. It's packed, like I said, with the key changes, timelines, FAQs, and just a practical action plan that you can implement and get the ball rolling and start speaking to your teams, your managers. It's in the description down below, and I'll also have it on my LinkedIn this week as well. So definitely check it out. Well, that is it from me, everyone. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a lovely day, night, evening, morning, whatever it may be. And guess what? I'll catch you in the next one, everyone.